So then if you take a look at the slide on the bottom left there, that's the spring tooth cultivator. And as you can tell, it's rusty and old and not beautiful, and we picked it up fairly inexpensively and haven't had to do anything to it to be able to use it. The nice thing about it is that it's connected on the 3-point on the back of the tractor, and it can do very shallow tillage. We don't go more than a couple of inches deep. Just getting the top soil layer so that we can loosen it up to make enough of a bed to get the soil connected to the seeds well. And then the one in the middle is a flex harrow. I kind of set it up when I took the picture trying to get a better look at it, but it basically has these levers on the top that can make these small metal spikes that look kind of like a railroad spike, either go straight down into the ground or angled forward or backwards, depending on if you want to have a little bit more tillage or light tillage. It's very adjustable for all of that. And so when we're planting, the things that we're thinking about are trying to have the least number of passes over the field when we're planting, for the pure fact of the least amount of fuel consumed and the least amount of compaction on the soil as we're passing over it. So we'll take one pass with the spring tooth cultivator to loosen the soil, but we'll be pulling the harrow behind it at the same time so that it's smoothing the ground out and creating the seed bed as we go. And then we'll take one more pass with the seed drill and the roller behind it, where we're planting the seeds and the roller is firming up that seed bed as the seeds are going into the ground. And then I'll just point out one more thing about this slide is that the cover crops versus the green manure crops, when you're planting a new seed bed, a cover crop is something such as oats or rice, something that has a lot of structure to it, something that's going to give you a solid, they're going to grow fast in one season. It's an annual crop. But it's going to give you a lot of root structure down in the ground and something coming up, so that when your grass is coming in, which is a lot slower to develop and very small the first year, there's something there. That cover crop acts as the structure for holding the soil while you're waiting for your grass and legumes to get established, so you're not having a lot of runoff and rilling in your bare soil. The cover crop is critical for that. We've done that a number of times. The only thing about that is that it's creating a crop, and so we've had to go in and use our swather to cut it, but it's so short and small that you cut it and you can just leave it, let it lay, and it acts as a mulch as well, which has been a real kind of a double thing. It gets this root structure in the ground as well as leaving the cover over top of the soil for when rain comes and runs off. The green manure crop, we add things into our seed mix, such as winter peas that get a lot of growth in one season, and that can be cut and left and decompose and incorporated into the soil to increase nitrogen for the plants that you're ultimately trying to get growing, which is the pasture seed legume mix. Next slide, please. So I'm going to move on to hay production, and this is the cutting equipment. We have a tractor, and the swather in the left picture will cut the grass. It has a conditioner built into it, and then there's a chute in the back of the swather that you can't see in this picture, where it puts it into a windrow, which basically means that the conditioner crimps the hay as it's cutting it so that it is more able to dry quickly, and then it puts it in a row so that it's ready for you to be able to pick it up with your baler. We have a hydro swing, which has the hydraulic arm, which you're seeing, that connects to the tractor there, and we have hydraulic levers where we can move the swather back and forth to line up into the hay where we're cutting it, which is really helpful when you're making corners and loops around a field. There's a lot of people that have ones that are their own self-contained unit, which has its pluses and minuses. Your neck gets really sore driving the tractor, looking back back of the swather where you're cutting the whole time on this. But then when you have a self-propelled one, you have one more engine to take care of, one more piece of equipment to maintain, and that's another factor just to think about. The hay rake is on the right-hand side, and that is very critical in drying your hay. If one of the pluses and minuses of the swather putting it into a row is that it gets it ready for you to be able to pick up, but then sometimes if your hay is really thick, it means you'll have to turn your hay in order to get it dry before you're ready to be able to pick it up. The rake is also very good for combining rows of hay after they're cut so that you have really thick windrows, and the rake you can go full speed on a tractor, whereas when you're baling you're going a lot slower, so you can combine your hay to be able to pick up the hay with the baler and make bales a lot quicker. Next slide, please. So there's kind of the back and forth about different sizes of bales. This is just talking about the equipment for picking it up and getting it into a way that you can actually feed it to your animals. So we, at this point, actually, we started out with just a small baler, which is the picture on the left, which is really handy for a small scale producer because it's you can pick all the bales up by hand. They weigh 55, 65-ish pounds, which is nice if in the winter for feeding animals. And depending on how many animals you're feeding, you know, if it's a smaller number, it's really easy and convenient. You can feed the hay a little bit, have more control over how much hay you're feeding to your animals. And it's a toss-up if it's easier or not to feed that way, because you are able to do it all by hand, but then that's taking human energy to be able to move it. Small bales, you have to physically, unless you have another piece of equipment, which we've never owned, there's things like accumulators, hay bale wagons, which do all things like pile them in piles of 5 to 7, or which is an accumulator, or a hay wagon, which picks them all up in a wagon and stacks them in your barn for you, which you can imagine is another costly expense, something we've never invested in. The small bales are easy to stack and in a compact way in a barn or under tarps, but they are more labor intensive. The large baler, which we just invested in for the first time 2 years ago, are nice because if you have a lot more animals, you can feed them, it's quicker to feed them, you can feed them less frequently. They are quicker to get out of the field, but they do require having a tractor to pick them up, and if you're doing any significant amount of haying, you have to have a trailer and something to pull the tractor in order to do that. So more equipment intensive, but depending on what your situation is, those might be things you already have. As far as rain, large bales are pretty nice. You probably have seen people have you know, single layers of large bales out in the field where the rounded edge is up. They shed water really well, so the hay inside won't rot. It only affects a small amount on the outside. Whereas small bales, if they get wet in the field before you get them in, that can be a really big problem and hazardous to, you know, creating combustion and fire in your barn. And so, you know, the large bales are harder to stack, not as compact, but you know, less work in the feeding area if you have a lot of animals. Next slide, please. All right, now hay, so this is where I was talking about hay moving equipment, like actually getting it to your animals. So there's, on the top right corner is a hay elevator, which I had to actually just take a picture of it. I didn't get one in action because whenever we're in action actually using it, we're not thinking about taking pictures of it. So there's on the bottom of that hay elevator picture, you can see there's just a little 1 horsepower motor. You plug that in, and there's little spikes that go along a rotating chain that one person throws the bales on the bottom, somebody's up in the barn, it lifts them all up into the barn for you. It only takes 1 season of not owning a hay elevator and having small bales for you to buy one of those. They are they're fairly inexpensive, but they seem to be, from what I found, hard to come across. And then on the bottom right, you're just seeing our setup. We have a truck and a trailer that we haul our bales out of our fields to get into our barns from. You don't necessarily need to own a dump truck and a piece of heavy equipment, but just because of what our situation and what we have is that. I know lots of people who use a pickup truck and build a very simple, low, single axle trailer to haul hay out of the field, which works really well too. The middle picture is showing the bale spears. This is on our newer tractor, and it actually came with this, so it's kind of a hyped up 4 or a 5-point bale spear. Our old tractor, we just had 2, but basically you're just taking the bucket off and putting this bale spear on it, and they pierce into large bales to pick them up and stack them and move them around. And then indispensable in our farm for feeding and moving feed around of especially small bales is our 4-wheeler and our wagon. That is how we get our feed to our animals. So bale spear is pretty critical for getting hay, large bales out of the field, and feeding animals in the winter. Next slide, please. And so the question of old equipment versus new or new to you equipment. So one of the things I should mention too is that my husband is very knowledgeable and knows how to fix equipment. If we didn't have an on-farm mechanic, we would have to have different equipment because he maintains it regularly. There's kind of a list of the different things that are the pros and cons for purchasing either. We have operated our entire farm for the last 8 years on a very old 60-year-old tractor, but it's required constant maintenance to do so. Purchasing new equipment is good if you can do it. It's hard to make those things pay, and that's why I stuck on there that they don't pay back ever and slow, or if ever, but they do retain value. And the new equipment has special features. Like this picture that you're looking at is a picture of our new equipment. It has detachable pieces on the front, like the bucket and the bale spears are easily detachable, which is a really big deal on our other tractors. So those kinds of special features help you operate your farm easier in the long run. And just one more point, the picture there on the right is just showing you some of the features of like the PTO, the power takeoff, the 3 points there that hook up most equipment for pulling on the 3-point hitch. And this has a couple of hydraulic ins and outs so that you can have other equipment running off of that as well, which are all useful things to consider when you're purchasing a tractor. So I think that that's the end of what I have to talk about, and I'll pass it back to Colette.